Chapter 1991. Daisy pushed the door of the private room open, saw about 5 people behind the wooden screen, and walked in. Shannon was the first to see her, so he got up and walked toward her. "Daisy, you're finally here. Come and join us, and let me introduce the latest investor of our drama to you." Daisy's gaze landed on the man sitting with his back facing her. Just as Shannon had finished speaking, the man turned his head slowly and met her gaze. Daisy froze in place for a moment, and she could not believe who she saw. "You." There was a smile on the corner of his lips, and it looked as warm and elegant as it was back then. "Daisy, it's been a long time." Daisy chuckled and patted his upper arm. "Zafir, it's really you. Since when did you return to Zlokova?" The screenwriters and producers present in the room were all astonished. Even Shannon could not help but laugh out loud. "Do you know each other?" Zafir looked at Shannon, smiled, and nodded. "Yeah, we're quite familiar with each other." Shannon seemed to understand something and laughed heartily. "I see. Since you're both acquaintances, then there's no need for both parties to be polite and take your seats." Daisy was originally wondering who the new investor was, but she did not expect that it was Zafir, a friend that she had not seen in several years. She remembered that both Zafir and Leah had chosen to study abroad after graduating high school. Although she had not been in much contact with them over the years, she still remembered them. She sat down right next to Zafir. "Zafir, have you seen Leah throughout all these years?" Zafir responded with a smile. "She's in Staslo, and rumor has it that she's working as an interpreter in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but I haven't been in much contact with her in recent years." Daisy was astounded. Shannon poured a glass of wine. "Mr. Gosling, I've long heard that you specialize in film studies in Florinia, and you even took a film directing course too. And you've come back to Zlokova to start your career in the entertainment industry." Daisy paused and turned to look at him. "Zafir, did you study film directing? Didn't he plan to inherit the family business?" "Yeah, it just so happens that I'm interested in this industry," replied Zafir. He pinched the foot of the glass and clinked it against Shannon's. "Mr. Fallon, you've been engaged in the film industry for 16 years, and I've just gotten into the industry in recent years. I'm fortunate enough to have seen many movies directed by you when I was a kid, and there's still a lot more that I can learn from you in the future." In terms of working in the film industry, Shannon was really an extremely capable person. Zafir had officially gotten into the industry since he returned to Zlokova, making Shannon his predecessor in this field. Although he was an investor, he still showed Shannon a lot of respect, which made Shannon even more impressed by him. "Mr. Gosling, you're really flattering me." "I'm not flattering you. After all, the films directed by you have won all the Victoria Awards available in the industry. That's not something that you can achieve without any strong capability." Shannon laughed. "You youngsters are really terrifying. I'm afraid you'll catch up to me in a few more years." Zafir took the initiative to propose a toast. "Then I might have to come to you for more advice in the future, so I shall apologize beforehand for bothering you too much." Shannon nodded. "That's no big deal. It's a natural thing to do." Throughout the whole meal, everyone else was talking eloquently. Now that the project was very well funded, the filming location was set in Karelia. The crew decided to spend $5,500,000 to build a Victorian town that fit the background of the script. They decided to postpone the shooting to half a year later because the script was set to take place during the autumn and winter seasons, and a large number of scenes would take place during a snowy day. Shannon believed that artificial snowfall was very labor-intensive and expensive, and it looked far less real than genuine snow, so he would rather postpone it until winter rather than spend a high budget on artificial snowfall. Chapter 1992. For now, the only role that had its performer confirmed was Nancy Hanks, and Daisy would play her. Shannon had been going through and considering suitable actors for the other 2 leading roles, namely Simon Winchester and Zenos Yates. When the screenwriter asked Daisy for her opinion, she was stunned. "Do you want my opinion?" Shannon waved his hand and explained, "It's okay, Daisy. You have also read the script and the original novel. You can recommend who you think is the most suitable actor for the roles." Daisy stared at Zafir. Zafir nodded with a smile. She rubbed her chin and gave it a thought. After all, those two characters were supposed to be gay in Freya's original novels. However, after her copyright to the novel was acquired by others and changes were made to the original copy, the rather sensitive LGBT relationship was changed into a brotherhood. Simon Winchester was a reporter and was once the son of a wealthy family. Because of the tragedy that had happened to his parents in his earlier years, he had a great obsession with serial murders. That was why he snuck into a press agency anonymously and used his identity as a reporter to investigate what happened 20 years ago. He later discovered that the serial killer's modus operandi 20 years later was related to the tragic death of his parents back then. And Zenos Yates was the detective in charge of investigating the serial murders, and he regarded Simon Winchester, whose behavior was quite mysterious, as a suspect. The two got to know each other more through their respective investigation. Simon Winchester was set to be a withdrawn, unfit, taciturn, paranoid, vigilant, and sensitive person. His only focus in life was to find out the person who murdered his parents. As for the character set of Zenos Yates, he was set to be a slightly careless person, someone who thought out of the box, was sloppy and looked unreliable but could stay calm and think wisely at the critical moment. He had good skills and a rather unhealthy addiction to tobacco and alcohol. Zenos Yates was a 32-year-old tough and rough man. As long as his acting skills were strong and his age was appropriate, any actor who could smoke and drink could play him. And Simon Winchester's age was set at 21, he was very young and looked elegant and fine, just like a woman. But what Daisy had in mind was James. She hesitated for a moment and suggested slowly, "How about we let James try out for this role?" Everyone present was shocked, especially the screenwriters. "James? As in James Tell?" The producer looked at Shannon, who remained silent, and asked directly, "Miss Vanderbilt, James' age and image are indeed in line with that of Simon Winchester's, but if you want him to play Simon Winchester, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for the audience to accept it, won't it? James rarely acted in movies. Even if he were to be offered the opportunity to act, he had always been given roles such as ignorant young masters or sons of some filthy rich families. His acting skills could be said to be very limited, and he had risen to popularity only because of Charlie's keen vision. Charlie knew those roles that suited him and those that did not suit him well. Thus, he had been trying his best to make him take on fewer roles that were not suitable for him. If his acting skills were not good enough, putting his true colors forward in a film could cover up his shortcomings. But Simon Winchester was different. Although Simon Winchester was also a child of a wealthy family, his family got into some trouble after his parents were murdered. This character was on the other end of the spectrum when it was being compared to James' personality. Besides that, could James even play a character who bore the hardship, humiliation, and disgrace and hid in the shadows just to find out the real murderer? Daisy explained solemnly, "If an actor wants to undergo a transformation, don't they have to break through the limitations they face in their acting career? And I think James isn't as incompetent as everyone thinks he is. He's just reluctant to make a change. I believe he can ascend to a higher level as long as he wants." The producer still hesitated, however. Shannon suddenly added, "If James is willing to endure this hardship and work hard, it's nothing for me to allow him to perform." Daisy laughed. "Mr. Fallon, are you saying you're willing to give him a chance?" Chapter 1993. Shannon nodded. "Although I've never worked with James, I've worked with his mother, Marijuana Gonzalez. Since he's Marion's son, his acting skills shouldn't be too bad." Daisy glanced at him. "Thank you, Mr. Fallon. Then I'll discuss this matter with him when I get back." It was 11 o'clock in the morning when the meal was over. Daisy and Zafir sent Shannon and the producers downstairs. After the others left, the two walked to the parking lot in the basement. Daisy walked beside him. Zafir, why didn't you say you wanted to be a director? After not seeing him throughout all these years, Zafir was no longer the elder brother that she knew from school. He looked more mature, handsome, and elegant than back then. He turned to look at her. You never asked me back then. She scratched her cheeks and smiled embarrassedly. You're right, but I'm surprised that you would choose to get into showbiz. Whichever field that I choose, it'll always be the same. He stopped, turned to look at Daisy, and pursed his lips when his gaze swept across the ring on her finger. I thought you would have forgotten about me after so many years. She squinted and smiled. Why would I? Zafir lowered his gaze. How have things been all these years? She replied, everything's fine. How about you? The treatment you get in Florinia's Film Academy should be top-notch, right? He gave off a faint smile. It's fine. Daisy chuckled. Judging from how outstanding you are, I guess you must have been very popular while you were in Florinia. Do you have a girlfriend now? Zafir glanced at her and did not answer. It was probably because of the awkward silence, which made Daisy feel a little embarrassed. She looked away unnaturally and asked, did I just go into something too personal? No, you didn't. Zafir walked to his car and paused for a few seconds. I don't have a girlfriend. It sounded as if he was trying to explain. But Daisy did not get the intention of the sentence and was a little surprised. Zafir still doesn't have a girlfriend? Isn't this a little too outrageous? He looked back at her and asked, are you going to Tenet Media? I'll drop you off. Daisy thought that they had not seen each other for so many years, and he had always been like an elder brother to her, so she did not reject his offer. Then I shall bother you for a little longer. Daisy opened the door and got into the car. Coincidentally, the paparazzo sitting in a car not far away picked up his camera and captured the man's face and Daisy, who got into his car. Zafir drove Daisy to the entrance of Tenet Media. Daisy got out of the car and turned around. Zafir, thanks for the ride. He nodded and watched as Daisy walked into the building. It was not until her figure disappeared from his sight that he withdrew his gaze, leaned back in the seat, and took out a photo hidden in the secret compartment in the car. In the photo, Daisy was sitting in a library. When the photo was captured, she was still studying in junior high school. Now that he had reunited with her, she had already grown into an enchanting and dazzling lady. He had insisted on studying abroad back then so that he could become the man who could stand beside her someday. Knowing that she would definitely get into the entertainment industry, he had chosen to pursue a career in the film industry, majoring in film studies, and had undergone several directing and screenwriting courses. Unfortunately, it was already too late when he received the news of her return to Zlokova. Has there always been someone staying by her side over the years? And could that person be the man whose name is Knowles, that Coleman mentioned to me back then? Zafir squinted as he sank into deep thought. At the same time, at Black Gold, Colton was talking to Knowles in the office. Hearing that Sandy had been in contact with Donald, Colton frowned. They're coming for you. Knowles slid his finger across the rim of the cup. I'm the one that they want. That's why I plan to lure the snake out of its lair. Chapter 1994. After saying that, he added, don't worry, I won't get Daisy involved. Colton pursed his lips tightly for a while. How confident are you? He smiled and lifted his gaze. Are you worried about me, Colton? Colton clicked his tongue and crossed his arms. I'm not worried about you. Daisy will become a widow if you take a careless step and die. I don't wish to see her become a widow at such a young age, because of you. Knowles picked up the cup and said nothing. Colton got up. If you need help, voice out at any time. You'd better not die. The corner of Knowles' lips twitched slightly upon hearing this, and he took a sip of tea. Daisy was looking for James to talk about him taking over the role, but as soon as she stepped into the studio, she saw Freya moving boxes. She dashed straight over, helped her with the boxes, and scolded her, Freya. Aren't you on leave? Why have you come back to work all of a sudden? And why are you carrying such a heavy box? Aren't you afraid of hurting the baby? Freya replied helplessly, I'm only a month and a half pregnant. It's not as huge of a deal as you think it is. Besides, my pregnancy doesn't affect my work at all. I said no, and that's an order. Daisy put the boxes down. If anything were to happen to you, Colton would kill me. As soon as Colton was mentioned, Freya pursed her lips and kept quiet. Daisy took Freya to the couch and asked her to sit down. I'll get someone to come over and help you with chores like moving boxes. You should rest. Daisy picked up the landline and called someone to come upstairs to help. The boxes were filled with items that the agency would normally use, and they were too heavy to be moved by only one person sometimes. Daisy. Freya suddenly called her. Daisy put down the handset and turned around. What's wrong? Freya lowered her gaze. Colton seems to mind that I'm planning to raise Dee Dee. When Colton asked her for her thoughts last night, she could not answer him. After Colton left, she thought about it all night. Did he ask her the question because he minded me raising Dee Dee? Dee Dee was not related to him. As far as the Goldmans were concerned, Dee Dee was only an outsider. Freya did not expect the Goldmans to adopt Dee Dee. After all, Dee Dee was her niece, and she had been watching over her since she was born. In any case, she wanted to raise Dee Dee until she got into adulthood. She was already very grateful when Colton helped her to get Dee Dee out of Sandy's control and fight for Dee Dee's custody. And she also knew that it was really unreasonable to get married to the Goldmans with a niece. After all, she and Colton were already expecting a child of their own. After giving birth, she would have to take care of Dee Dee on the one hand and their biological child on the other. Dee Dee had become particularly sensitive because of what Sandy had done to her, and she had been particularly attached to Freya recently. Perhaps Colton was afraid that she would be too busy with the kids to even take care of herself. Daisy supported her chin in one hand and gave it a thought. She then explained after a while, you're pregnant, and you have to now take care of Dee Dee, and Dee Dee is only attached to you. Is Colton worried that you'll get too tired? Freya placed her palm on her flat stomach and smiled. Maybe. In the evening, at the Seaview Villa. As soon as Freya stepped into the entryway, she saw Dee Dee sitting barefoot on the stairway, waiting for her to come home. The nanny beside her tried to persuade her and wanted to pick her up, but she would not let her do so, nor go upstairs. Seeing Freya, Dee Dee got up, walked toward her, and hugged her. Auntie Freya. Freya looked down at her, sighed, and squatted down after a while. Dee Dee, Auntie Freya has a job during the day, so you have to listen to the nanny when you're at home. Dee Dee lowered her head. But I only want you. Chapter 1995. Freya raised her hand and stroked her head. The nanny at home won't hurt you, so be brave and don't be afraid anymore, okay? Dee Dee did not utter a single word. Mr. Goldman. The nanny suddenly stepped aside and nodded respectfully. Colton handed his suit to the nanny, and the nanny took it from him and stepped back. He then unbuttoned his cuffs and stepped forward. What's wrong? Freya said something to Dee Dee, and the latter took a glance at Colton before going upstairs. She stood up, turned around, and stared at Colton. Dee Dee is still mentally scarred. She just won't follow anyone that she doesn't know well around. Colton took a glance upstairs. Maybe we can find her a therapist to help her out. After saying that, he turned his head and looked at her. You're now pregnant, and you still have to make time to take care of her. And the main thing is that besides you, she won't let the nanny take care of her. So if we don't give her the right guidance, I'm afraid that it'll affect her in the future. Freya was astonished. She guessed that Colton was worried that she would be overwhelmed, but she did not expect that he was worried about Dee Dee's mental health too. She took a deep breath. Colton. As soon as Dee Dee recovers, I'll ask my father to come and pick her up. Colton paused as a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. I didn't mean that. Does she think that I don't agree with her keeping Dee Dee here? He had asked her the other night if she really wanted to raise Dee Dee only to know her thoughts on the topic. If she wanted, It was nothing for him to raise an extra niece. I know. Freya chuckled. You thought about too many matters for me. This time, just take this as me thinking about you in return. Didi is still a Pruitt, after all. She can even accompany my father when she returns to the Pruitt residence. My father will definitely treat her well. Colton raised his eyebrows. Aren't you worried that your mother will go back to the manor? Freya pursed her lips, and her expression dimmed. Since she refuses to go back, why would Nolace let her go back? This is her own choice. What happens to her has nothing to do with me. Even if she faces the same ending as Ken did, that's the consequence that she'll have to face, because of her stubbornness. She had never had many feelings for her mother at first. She had hoped for her to realize her mistakes and change for the better, but she was disappointed by her later on. Thus, she no longer expected any changes from her. Apart from being related by blood, they were like strangers to each other. Colton took her into his arms abruptly. She was stunned and froze in his arms, only to hear a deep, bold voice coming from overhead. In the future, our baby and I will be your family. You'll never have to be alone. Upstairs, a tiny figure walked by silently and disappeared into the corridor. The next day, Daisy came to the crew to look for James. He seemed to have just finished shooting and was standing by to let the staff help remove the heavy armor from his body. The crew members were surprised when they saw Daisy. It's Miss Vanderbilt. Is she here to visit Mr. Tell? It seems that the relationship between Miss Vanderbilt and Mr. Tell is really close. James turned his head and saw Daisy standing at the side, waving at him. He shoved the script into his assistant's arms and walked over. What happened? Why are you here? Daisy picked up a cup of coffee and handed it to him. I'm here to visit you at work. James took the coffee from her and asked suspiciously, You're here to visit me? Why do I smell something fishy? She crossed her arms. Exactly right. I'm looking for you because I have something to talk to you about. He undid the lid and drank the coffee. What's the matter? Daisy looked around. Let's have a chat in your RV. Chapter 1996. James went to the RV with Daisy and asked when he only saw Daisy alone. Why isn't Freya around? He hadn't seen Freya in a long time since Colton made their relationship public. But if she was in a relationship with Colton, she wouldn't need her job as an assistant anymore. Daisy took the script out of her bag, paused, and raised her brows. Freya is pregnant, so I can't ask her to help with everything. James was shocked. What? She's pregnant? Daisy saw the sadness in his eyes and felt sorry for him. Had he not given up yet after so long? She took a deep breath and changed the subject. You know about director Fallon's new movie? I've got you a role in it. James was surprised. Huh? Now that your dad canceled your cards, you probably need to make some money. After saying that, Daisy continued. I can promise that this character will be the one that can help you break out of your typecast. He smiled and put his hand to his forehead. Daisy, you overestimate me. James, are you not confident in yourself? I've always been like that. Daisy didn't know what to say and looked at the script in her hands. If she hadn't given her opinion the other day, Fallon wouldn't have thought of James. Nobody would. James wasn't the best actor, but maybe because his personality fitted the roles he took, a lot of people overlooked his acting. Getting him to act as Simon Winchester was a huge challenge because it would be something out of his comfort zone. Since Shannon gave him a chance, it showed that he had hopes for him, and also because of his looks and age matched with Simon Winchester. Thus, Daisy would need James to at least try it out, no matter what. Daisy handed the script for Simon to James and asked him to skim through it. After 15 minutes, James went over the entire script and didn't feel right. No. Daisy, you want me to take this role? It was one of the male characters, which was quite important and different from the roles that he used to play. Daisy looked at him. That's why I said it would break you out of your typecast. James, do you want your father to look down on you for the rest of your life? That hit home. James looked down and was deep in thought. Your father cancelled your cards and doesn't let you spend his money, so you have to start acting. You keep taking supporting roles, but none of them are challenging. This limits your skills. You're still young, so you can play those characters for a few more years, but once you get into your 30s or 40s, you won't be able to get those roles anymore. You're just going to become the lead's father one day. Even though you won't be able to work in the industry forever and have to take over the family business one day, do you think your father will hand the business over to you if you're not even doing well in the entertainment industry? Even if he did, he probably wouldn't be able to retire. You'll take over, but still have to get to listen to him when making any decision. Do you want that kind of life? James had never thought about the future. Chapter 1997. James just wanted to take things one step at a time and get through life that way. He was the only son of the Tell family, so who else would his father give the inheritance to if not him? But what Daisy said was a stab in his heart. She was right because his father had always forced him to do what he didn't want to. His acting career was also part of his father's plan. His father had never agreed to what he wanted to do. He never had a choice, because all his spending, food, and clothes were all paid for by his father. Daisy saw that he was hesitating and knew that advising him wouldn't work, so she took matters into her own hands. She leaned forward and asked, "Don't you want to act as a character written by Freya?" His face turned red, and he took a few steps back. "What are you talking about?" Daisy didn't realize that James was so innocent and would blush, so she chuckled. "I know that you have a thing for Freya, and even though she's now my sister-in-law, this script was based on a novel she has written." James paused. "She's the author?" "Yes, she was low-key about it." She sighed. "The copyright belonged to her, but her publisher sold it behind her back. I got this role for you so that she would see you in a good light. If you don't want it, I'll take it." James immediately agreed. Daisy smiled like a fox. At Tenet, Daisy informed Shannon about the news and then happily returned to her room. She saw Freya sitting in front of the computer with a serious expression while deep in thought. She finally looked up when Daisy walked in. "You're trending." Daisy was surprised. Again? She hadn't done anything recently but froze when she walked to the computer. #Daisy Vanderbilt went on a date with a mysterious man. #She had been photographed while walking out of the building with Saphir. She didn't expect the paparazzi to catch them leaving, and now they were trending. Her head ached. "That's a misunderstanding." Freya shook her head. "It is, but it's a big one. Knowles will be jealous if you don't explain yourself." She choked. Nolly wouldn't be jealous about something so petty. Freya rested her chin on her hand and raised her brow. "Really? Look at the comments." She read them and was shocked. Her fans were guessing that the man in her announcement was Saphir, and they were trying to explain on her behalf. It was great that they were on her side, but that was just messing things up more. Daisy stood in the corridor and sent a text to Knowles, who took a long time to reply. Her heart dropped. Is he angry? Daisy immediately rushed to Taylorton. She got out of the car and ran straight to the living room. Knowles sat cross-legged on the couch, staring at his screen. His expression was neutral. He sipped his coffee, looked at Daisy, and then paused. You're back early. Daisy took a deep breath, walked forward, and closed his laptop. Nolly, don't trust what they're saying on the trending news. Knowles was surprised. He smiled after seeing how anxious she was. Chapter 1998. Daisy heaved a sigh of relief, because she was glad he didn't believe it. Knowles suddenly pulled her into his arms, and pressed his slightly cold hand on her cheek. But, are you not going to explain yourself? She started sweating. He said he didn't believe it, but he was angry. I'm just friends with Zeffie. Zeffie, Knowles' expression changed ever so slightly, and then raised her chin. I thought you'd only call me in such a way. He didn't look angry, but Daisy could feel that it was getting tricky, so she grabbed his hand and was anxious. That was different. I really see him as a friend. Knowles leaned in closer to her. When did you meet? Daisy looked away. You went back to Yarramore, so I have the right to meet people. She started feeling annoyed as she said that. Knowles pressed his lips together because she was still angry about what he had said all those years ago. He hadn't wanted to involve her in his problems, which was why he had said that when they were at the airport. He had wanted to deal with Madame Knowles back in Yarramore and come back and explain everything to her, but Madame Knowles had other plans. He had gotten into an accident after he landed. He had managed to stay alive but lost all his memories, including what had transpired in Zlokova and Daisy. He had no idea what happened to Daisy after that, and it didn't matter to him either. Now that he thought about it, he had almost lost her. Looking at her pouty cheeks, Knowles couldn't help but kiss the corner of her lips. I'm just a little jealous. He made her face him. You know that I'm petty. I can't control myself when I see you with another man. She grumbled, I've explained myself. He held her tight in his arms and kissed her. All right, of course, I believe you. Daisy held his hand that was going down the wrong places, and her face flared up. Not here. Knowles carried her up to the room. We haven't had our meals yet. We'll do that now. Daisy ended up sleeping until 7 p.m. Knowles sat on the single-seater next to the bed. He sat there with his nicely toned body in a dark blue silk robe, and when he heard movement, he closed his magazine and looked up. You're awake? She didn't speak. Knowles had drained all her energy. He placed the magazine on top of their nightstand, stood up, and hugged her. She struggled. I can walk. His chuckle came from the top of her head. Are you sure you have the energy? That made her blush and press her face against his shoulder. Knowles carried her downstairs. She was stunned when she saw that there was candlelight dinner ready on the dining table. The atmosphere was great. Nolly, he put her down and kissed her hair. I didn't wake you up so I could prepare dinner. Do you like it? Daisy paused and was touched. Her annoyance at him dissipated, so she turned and smiled at him. I love everything you prepare for me. Knowles tapped the tip of her nose and held her hand. Please take a seat then, my princess. Having a candlelight dinner at home was just as nice as having one at a restaurant. Chapter 1999. Daisy had a great meal and finally laid down her cutlery. Nolly, do you care what people online are saying? He looked up and touched her face after a long pause. I don't, because I'm the one who's by your side. Those speculations were all made up. Daisy looked a little disappointed. She was hoping to make things public, even if Donald found out. At least she could work things out with Knowles instead of hiding behind him whenever trouble arose. Knowles leaned in closer to her because he seemed to have noticed her emotions and placed his hand on the top of her head. We'll get a chance to go public. When that happens, I'll let the whole world know that I'm the man behind Miss Best Actress. Daisy looked into his light eyes and only saw herself in there. Are you going to face Donald? He didn't speak. Daisy turned away. I knew it. There must be a reason behind this candlelight dinner. Knowles smiled. How would you know? She said with full conviction, a woman's instinct. He laughed and gently touched her face. It's pretty accurate. He leaned forward and planted a kiss on her forehead. I'll be leaving Basberg for a few days. Wait for me. Daisy paused, then pushed him away. Knowles pulled her into a hug after seeing that made her angry. Be good. I promise that I'll come back safely, all right? Daisy looked down. I overheard your call the other day. He was surprised, then looked into her eyes. She lowered her head and said, just because I don't ask doesn't mean I don't know anything. Nolly, you can't face this alone. If we make our relationship public, he'll come to find us. Daisy. His chest heaved while he lowered his voice. That's different. I can't take the risk with you. If anything happens to you, all that I have held on to would have been pointless. He kissed the top of her head. I'm not going alone. I have a plan. Please, believe me. Daisy lay in his arms in silence. Mr. Gosling, we weren't able to find out who Miss Vanderbilt is engaged to. I'm really sorry. There were only 2 men in the room. Zafir sat on the couch and swirled the wine in his glass. The wine was a dark red, like the color of blood. He looked at the glass and then at the men in front of the table. Nobody found out? The man lowered his head. I really can't find any information. That man is really good at hiding his identity. It's still a mystery. He added, but I heard a rumor that the man is the one who doesn't want his identity known, and Miss Vanderbilt is just following his wishes. Zafir drank the wine. All right, leave me, please. The man left. Zafir placed the empty glass on the table and frowned. He couldn't understand why the man didn't want people to know who he was. Was he deliberately trying to hide his identity? If he really loved her, why would he want to hide and force Daisy to play along? Zafir stared at the empty glass and mumbled, Daisy, are you really happy? The guessing game had been going on online for 2 days, but Daisy never said anything. Her fans assumed that she had quietly admitted to it, but in reality, Daisy had bigger things to worry about. Chapter 2000. After Knollys left Bassburg, Daisy returned to the Goldman mansion. Taylorton was empty without him there. She was lonely there by herself, but more importantly, she was very worried about him. Freya could tell that she had a lot on her mind, so she sat next to her. Knollys wouldn't let anything happen to him. He's such a smart man, so he must be very confident. Daisy picked up the coffee and took a sip before mumbling. Does he really think that he can do everything? Freya smirked. He never failed to do anything that he wanted, you know that. Daisy pressed her lips together and didn't answer. At that moment, Freya received a call. The caller said something which made her expression change and stand up. What? Didi is missing. Daisy and Freya went to the Seaview Villa together. The nanny had looked in every corner of the house, but couldn't find her. Freya ran out of the car and grabbed the nanny's shoulders. When did she go missing? The nanny said apologetically she was there in the morning. After breakfast, we started our chores, and no one noticed her. We thought she had gone back to her room. When the therapist came over, we realized that she wasn't in her room. Freya's face turned pale. Daisy took out her phone and anxiously said, I remember that there were cameras in the yard. If she went outside, we should be able to see her. I'll ask Colton for the surveillance footage. Colton picked up Daisy's call. When he found out that Didi was missing, he immediately ended his meeting and headed toward the villa. Daisy saw Colton walking through the door and stood up. Colton. Colton loosened his tie and frowned. I've checked the surveillance. She never left the yard, so she must be hiding somewhere. The helpers looked at each other. But we've looked everywhere and couldn't find her. Colton fell silent. Daisy suddenly remembered something and said, Colton, when we were playing hide and seek as kids, we always had a hard time finding Waylon. Do you think she's hiding where he did? It was the house they lived in when they were kids, so they would know it better than the helpers. Colton rushed upstairs, followed closely by Freya and Daisy. They got to the storeroom on the 3rd floor. It was a door behind the stairs that no one would see if they didn't get close enough. It used to be a storage area. Colton opened the door and immediately saw Didi hiding inside under the dim lighting. Freya rushed forward. Didi. Didi rested her head on Freya's shoulder and didn't say anything. Freya carried her out of there and put her down. She started being anxious, probably because she was nervous when they couldn't find Didi. What were you thinking? Do you know how worried everyone was? We were looking all over for you. Why did you hide? That was the first time Freya yelled at her. Didi looked down as tears started rolling and dripping onto the floor. Daisy walked forward. Freya, don't be angry. I don't think she intentionally hid. There must be some misunderstanding. Freya realized that she was too loud. When she saw Didi crying, her heart ached, and she tried to wipe her tears away. Didi suddenly pushed her belly.